Hi there. Congratulations to everyone at Northwood graduating this upcoming weekend. I hope everyone has a very great and successful future out there in the real world. And just it was a great time learning about the Republic and basically how everything ties into our United States here. So, for my very last presentation for our American Republic class, I'm going to do my presentation on Alexander Hamilton. So, Hamilton was born January 11th, 1755, and he was one of the founding fathers of the United States. And he was very influential because he helped create the Constitution, and he was a big founder of the nation's financial system, the Federalist Party. So when everyone was going back and forth on, what everyone wanted to put into the Constitution, Hamilton was kind of in the middle at this point. He was just trying to make sure everyone had the same ground to stand on, and everybody had their own thoughts and opinions on what should go into the Constitution. He also was in the United States Coast Guard and the New York Post newspaper. And another one of Hamilton's accomplishments early on was he was the Secretary of Treasury, and he was also the main author of the economic policies of the George Washington administration. And he also led in forming the federal government. And they basically, when they wanted to get the federal government together, it was basically formed around establishing a national bank. And this was through a system of tariffs, trade, and friendly trade relations with Britain. So they really wanted to make sure that the United States wanted to make sure that Britain was one of their most well-renowned trade partners that they had back when they were trading goods and services back and forth. And also he had a vision he was telling George Washington, and it was led by the executive branch. And it was also led by a strong military. So the United States essentially wanted a strong government system where they could use the taxes on food, services, anything like that, and they wanted their trade they really wanted to be trade partners with everyone they could, and they also wanted a strong military to back up their trades as well. So the person who was arguing this was Thomas Jefferson. He really wanted a smaller government. He didn't really believe that, a large government with a huge army was necessary. He was basically arguing for a smaller government just so everyone could have their own place in their society and so forth. So a little bit more background on Hamilton. He was born in Charleston, Nevis, and he was orphaned as a child, but was taken in by a merchant. And throughout this, he really wanted to pursue, when he got older, he wanted to pursue a life in the education field. So he took an early role in the American Revolutionary War. This began in 1777. And he basically was George Washington's left-hand man here. He basically helped him with anything he needed during the war, so on. Just basically anything that Washington ran into, he'd help him out there. So after the war, Hamilton was elected as a representative to the Congress of the Confederation from New York. And here he practiced law, and he also founded the Bank of New York, which was a big accomplishment for him as well. And at this point during Hamilton's career, he really wasn't high up in the government system. and he was basically seeking, he really wanted to replace the weak national government. And by doing this, he led the Annapolis Convention in 1786, which spurred Congress to call a constitutional convention in Philadelphia. And this was a huge thing back then, to call a convention to Philadelphia, when he helped achieve the ratification for the documents by writing 51 of 85 installments of the Federalist Papers. And this is one of his big things he grew up around, and really a lot of people know him by, are the Federalist Papers, which they remain till this day the single most important reference for constitutional interpretation. So with these, they really helped Hamilton basically set a ground and just have something to stand on, to have respect for everybody else that was in the cabinet at that point. So, and after that, he got a position in the Treasury Department, and he was a trusted member under President Washington's first cabinet. He was also a nationalist who emphasized strong central government and successfully argued that the implied powers of the Constitution provided the legal authority to fund the national debt. So basically, when he got into the Treasury Department here, he really focused on a lot of different issues that were at hand with the United States at this point, in terms of the Jay Treaty, the French Revolution, and things of that nature. So he really had ties to all those basically events that happened in history. So he also wanted to, with the national debt being high, his big thing, I talked about this earlier, was just his funding primarily the tariff on imports and the tax on whiskey. So with these, this would really help America bring together and help them in the long run in terms of succeeding as basically one of the highest powers in terms of globally, where we were at during that stage. So during this time, he also, after that, he fought in the Revolutionary War. So he had a long military career. That's what a lot of people bring up with Hamilton. With his early military career, though, some of the first engagements he's had with the American troops came in 1775 with the British at Lexington and Concord. So Hamilton and other of the King's College students joined a New York volunteer militia company called, they later renamed it the Hearts of Oak. And he drilled with the company before classes in the graveyard of nearby St. Paul's Chapel. And he really had a passion to study military history. And what I take out of that is he really enjoyed just really getting in and knowing his knowledge. He was a very smart man growing up, and he wanted to know all the ins and outs of military, and what the best tactics were for certain strikes that happened to him, and how he could rebuttal, and just all the history that went about the military with the tactics as well. And after he looked into all the history, he was soon recommended for a promotion. So he led a successful raid for British cannons in the battery, the capture of which resulted in the Hearts of Oak becoming an artillery company thereafter as well. So through his connections through New York, this is when Alexander and John Jay came in to the picture. And this is basically when everything got together for him in New York, and he excuse me, he took part in the campaign of 1776 at the Battle of White Plains and the Battle of Trenton. They were stationed at the high point of town, and they really wanted to focus in on this was when Washington rallied the American troops, and then they led a successful charge against the British forces. So this was one of the first wars that Hamilton actually served in, which was the Battle of Princeton, and he was under George Washington because he could not run an army by himself yet because he didn't have the experience, and he just wasn't in. I mean, history can only get you so far. It's just that real experience out on the battlefield that'll help you through all that. Excuse me. So after making a brief stand, the British finally fell back in the Battle of Princeton, and a lot of people took leverage on Nassau Hall, and then Hamilton brought 3 cannons up and had them fire upon the building, and some Americans rushed out through the front door and broke down the doors, and this led to the British basically waving the white flag out the windows, and they walked out of the building, laid down their arms, and this ended the battle, and the Americans ended up with that victory. So after that, George Washington really saw a lot out of Hamilton, and he wanted him to join his staff. So this is when Hamilton finally got in as one of the field commanders under George Washington. So he sought command and returned to active combat. As the war drew near to an end, though, he knew that his opportunity for military glory were diminishing. In February 1781, though, Hamilton was reprimanded by Washington and used this as an excuse to resign from his staff position. So, in hindsight there, Hamilton really was, he focused in on a lot of the wars that happened during these times here, but that's not what a lot of people know him as a military commander, but throughout the few wars he was in, he fought hard, always knew what he was doing during that time, and he was just a great leader. Only because he had all that military knowledge, and just everything he knew from Washington basically just got passed down to him. So he was really, for his military sake, they really had him. He really did well there. So, and so after his military career was over, he really moved into. He was command of 3 battalions, which were to fight in conjunction with the Allied French troops and taking the British fortifications at Yorktown. So Hamilton fought bravely and took 10, and then the French also fought bravely, suffered heavy casualties, and took number 9. And these also helped. This was one of his last battles, but these actions forced the British to surrender their entire army at Yorktown, Virginia, effectively ending major military operations in North America. So that's at this point, the British finally were done with war in the United States, and basically everybody moved on with what they were doing here in the United States. So, while Hamilton was still in Congress here, a lot of the soldiers began to pose a danger to the young in the United States. So most of the army here was basically just younger Americans that wanted to go into war and stuff like that. So Hamilton really didn't like that at all. And after all the military and war happened in Hamilton's life, he really focused in, and there's another little piece on the Federalist Papers here. Going back to that, He served as an assemblyman from New York County in the New York State legislation, and he was chosen as a delegate for the Constitutional Convention by his father-in-law. And even though Hamilton has been a leader in calling for a new constitutional convention, his direct influence at the convention itself was quite limited. He didn't really have that much say in anything, and he basically was just there to fill in and help if anybody wasn't able to show up, or if anything else happened during that time. And through all this, Governor George Clinton in the New York legislation had chosen New York's other two delegates, John Lansing Jr. and Robert Yates, and both of them opposed Hamilton's goal of a strong national government. So these two guys were not on Hamilton's side when it came to what he was fighting for, and they were both just hitting him with hammers left and right on whether the strong national government was worthwhile, and if he basically had enough documentation or anything to go along with what he was trying to present to everyone here. But whenever the other two members of the New York delegation were present, they decided New York's vote to ensure that there were no major altercations to the Articles of Confederation there. So all in all there, he didn't really end up with a lot per se, but he did go into detail on how he went into and basically had his say in the Articles of Confederation. So in terms of that, Hamilton was a great man, and he was one of our great founding fathers, and there's a lot to look back on this guy and appreciate for just reflecting for our United States in general and the United States of America. So he's one of the guys that really got us off the ground and helped with creating the Constitution and so forth.